Ladies and gentlemen, today we're putting two of the world's best sports cars head to head. We're talking forced induction versus naturally aspirated rear-wheel drive, Porsche versus BMW. Let's go. Now, real quickly, I'm gonna put the stats up for both of these cars so you can look at all the different power figures, the 0 to 60 times, the weight, and everything. Let's do it. We're hopping in the Porsche GT3 first, and we're gonna figure out what this car is all about and then tell you a little bit about the differences compared to the BMW M2. So, the first thing you realize when you get inside the GT3 is how low you sit. The seating position, your ass is to the ground. Additionally, the steering wheel is about half the size in the Porsche. Also the fact that, you know, this car is European spec regulated and it still sounds this damn loud and this good is fascinating. I would say if we compare the steering to the BMW M2, in the GT3 it's so light, it's so agile, and it feels as if the car just wants to dart across the road. And it's extremely precise, right? Just the smallest of inputs will have the car moving side to side. And look at that, we have a Ferrari F8 coming up the mountain, F8 Spider, that's pretty neat. One of the coolest things is obviously the sound of this car. That flat six revs all the way to 9,000 RPM. Let's listen to it. Wait. The other thing from the engines, there's a huge difference in how the power is delivered in these two cars. So the GT3, it makes more power. It's almost 300 kilograms lighter, but in the low RPM, it feels much slower. And that's because this car is naturally aspirated, whereas the BMW M2 has a twin turbocharged inline six. You really have to keep this car in high rev ranges compared to the BMW M2 to be able to accelerate out of the corners. That's another thing, the brake feel on this car compared to the BMW M2 is very different because this is much more like a racing car setup. You have to really press into the brakes to get the full effect. You don't get the full effect right away. They're not as sensitive at first, and they're very stiff. And then the throttle response from the GT3 is second to none. And I would say it just feels a little bit lighter in these hairpin corners where I can just sort of throw it in.
100%. Driving the BMW, I drove it up and down now actually. Compared to this, it's a huge difference. I don't even want to say that the M2 can't handle the corners.
It just doesn't like them as much.
The feeling, this
is meant to do that.
It's like it's on rails.
Yeah, and it likes going around those corners. Right. The M2 can do it, but it's not necessarily its favorite thing to do. This thing keeps begging you to push it harder and harder in those corners.
Sorry, I cannot think when you do that. Much faster. Oh my god, bro.
But the thing is, it's to do that, what I just did in this GT3 and the M2, I'd be a little bit unsettled. I'd have to really be focused. But in this car, it just comes to you because it gives you, the steering wheel literally feels like an extension, like another limb. Because your ass is to the ground, you feel the lateral movement underneath much better than in the M2. And the car is just so planted with mechanical grip. You know, this is the first 911 ever to have a front double wishbone suspension. So additionally, the front end grip is tremendous on this car as well. And you have to realize that the engine is in the back. There's not much weight on the front of this car. The M2 has a bunch of weight on the front end because it's a front engined vehicle. But I mean, I swear, I just can't keep saying this enough. I love this car so damn much. There's a reason. It makes sense to me now. I now understand why people say this is the best sports car in the world because it just gives you a feeling and puts a smile on your face when you drive it properly like no other car does.
And it's interesting, I would have to add there that it takes some time to be able to drive it properly. And you have to develop that trust for the vehicle, you have to develop the necessary skill set.
Yep. And additionally, you know,
like, I don't have it, I'm not...
But I mean, altogether, it's the little things on this car as well. It's the interior, the way the cabin's set up. This shift knob right here is in a perfect position, and it's, you know, standing up a little bit, so it's very easy for me to put my hand right there. It feels extremely intuitive. The steering wheel is close enough to me where I can have my hands and my elbows a little bit bent in a racing-like position. I'm looking right over the top of the hood. I'm not sitting too high, I'm not sitting too low, it's just the right height. Porsche dialed everything in this car up to perfection. There's not really much I can fault this thing on. The interesting thing is when I first got into the car, I was a little bit underwhelmed with the power, but that's because if you're even at 4,000 RPM, the kick doesn't feel that special. But because it's a lightweight flywheel, it picks up so fast and it revs so fast. The neat thing is, you can create some serious whiplash with this car. If you're at 5,000 RPM in first gear, just put your head all the way back. Whoa! Oh gosh, I mean, this car is just so freaking addicting. All right, so we've parked it now. Final conclusions with the GT3. The things that I love about it, the analog tach is bloody awesome. To have that in a 2023, 2024 car, I think the interior is completely flush. The screen fits in very nicely. You still have some tactile buttons here. The funny thing about Porsche with the GT3, a lot of cars have comfort, sport, sport plus. This has normal, sport, and track. They don't say comfort because there's no comfort in the GT3. Is my thing even on? Music dies. I know you're not a fool. I should have known better than to cheat a friend. A wasted chance that I've been given. That's how I feel after leaving the GT3. And I see in my rearview mirror. We don't want any of this stuff inefficient. So unlike the GT3, the M2 is a lot more technical, high tech. You got to set stuff up. So what we want, we're gonna go into M mode, and we have these three selections right here: road, sport, and track. So we will select track. Track aktivieren. Und dann gehen wir zum Setup. So, and then we go to setup. And with motor, we put it to Sport Plus. Fahrwerk, we put it to Sport Plus. Lenkung, which is a steering, Sport, and the brake, of course, Sport. This is something that I mentioned earlier as well. Also, before we do that, we want to turn the shift power up all the way, and we are good to go now. Wow, okay, so first things first, again, the difference, as I mentioned, as soon as I got into the GT3, is just the seating position and the steering wheel. I'm foot to the floor right now, and I can already feel the torque is much, much more there. The amount of brake pressure that you need to apply, these brakes are much, much more sensitive, so they're much more like normal brakes. You get a lot more braking force with just a slight tap on the throttle. So that's a little bit of a thing that I need to get accustomed to. Power-wise, you know, honestly, they pick up the same way. They don't, one doesn't feel that much quicker, but this one does feel a lot heavier, a lot more like a bus compared to the GT3. But the fascinating thing is, you just have to trust the car. It'll do what the GT3 can do in these corners, right? On track, that's a different story. And then, of course, you have the adaptability of using this for comfort every day.
I would definitely agree. I would just want to touch at a point onto that braking thing. Switching between all the cars, this one was the most annoying for braking. Because you hit the brake, and all you got to do is tap it.
Yeah.
And you're jolting again. So
the brake is extremely sensitive in this car, and I wonder if I turn it to comfort now, how much. So honestly, that feels already a lot better. So when you put it into sport, the brake, it's extremely sensitive. It's way too sensitive for my liking, especially because when you're driving around these corners, you're gonna be using the brake. You're gonna want it to be ready. And when it's so sensitive, it almost just throws you off. To me personally, I like the GT3 setup a little bit more, how it's just, you know, switch the dial and then you got everything how you want it. Things that I like about the M2 is that adaptability that I talked about. I find it neat that we were just able to have the brake in sport, and it was way too sensitive for me. I turned it to comfort and it feels a lot more natural, right? That's something that you can't do in a GT3. And all else equal, only the brake sensitivity changes. Everything else, like the 5-ec, the suspension, the motor, the steering, is still in the Sport Plus settings. Sometimes when you come out of the corners, it bounces around, especially when you upshift. See, like that. When you upshift in the middle of the corner, the car bounces around, so that's still got that BMW M characteristics. I think this steering, it moves around as well a little bit. I compare it to the GT3. Wherever you have the steering wheel placed, it's gonna stay there. It's not gonna move around, and the car is gonna stay there as well. And those corners,
that was impressive.
It was impressive.
Hold.
It does hold, but it just, in the driver position, it is incomparable to the GT3,
dude,
right?
In my position, I mean, I also felt like that GT3, I can't even say that the thing moved side to side, but you could feel that there was a lot more pressure on those
tires,
outside wheels, and
yep.
you were pushing it. You were, 10, 15 more miles and you might start slipping. Whereas with the GT3, every corner you took at speeds that I would never touch, I was like, it could have gone faster.
Exactly, exactly. You might be wondering, why the hell are we even comparing these two cars? And the reason why is because the M2 and the GT3 are two of the greatest sports cars. It's BMW and Porsche, but also this car, at the end of the day, can keep up with that GT3 on these roads. All right, consensus on them too. I like the way it drives, but it does feel a little bit more boaty to me. The fascinating thing is that this new M2 can keep up with that GT3 on the mountain roads. You might not feel as safe doing it, but the technology is there. It's capable of doing it. This one has a lot more daily usability. It's got way more space in the back. You can actually fit 4 people there, so.
I'd obviously take both. Like, I mean, of course, who doesn't want a GT3 Porsche, right?
Yeah.
But if we're talking like realistic terms, I don't have unlimited money, but I could afford both. And with my current driving skills right now, I'm going with the BMW M2. Mm-hmm. I think my main argument for less than half the price, the similarity that BMW was able to achieve to the GT3 in this vehicle is super impressive. And so it really comes down to the person. If that's important to you, bang for your buck. Yeah. I think that pretty much sums it up. Bang for your buck. Yeah. This wins.
Bang for your buck.
Everything else, Porsche takes the crown. Yeah. Last thing, but if you're one of those guys that likes the head nods, likes the waves when you're driving your car,
get a GT3.
Yeah.
The amount of people, the kids faces are looking at us like that, so.
Everyone was trying to say what's up in the GT3. You saw people looking at this car, but at the end of the day, half the people can't even tell it's a M. You know, they just see BMW in a cool color.
And general consensus, you said it well, bang for your buck, the M2 is the winner, but GT3 is miles ahead in pure driving pleasure. So without further ado, please browse the channel, subscribe. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and like always, I'll see you guys next time with even better car content.